2011, the University of Southern California made a plan to build the Village, which is at the corner of Jefferson and Hoover, right across the main entrance to campus. It houses over 2,500 students, many shops and restaurants, including a bar, a beauty salon, an eye doctor, a Target, and a Trader Joe's. For USC students, this sounds like the dream. But what we may not all know is what existed before the Village. And how did the surrounding community react to this 7-year-long process? Welcome to Neighborhood Watch. On today's episode, we will be joined by PhD candidate Ben Toney and student and community member Enzo Luna. My name is Jess Helfenstein, and I'll be your host. I first want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm a USC student who has benefited from the construction of the Village. I am not unaware, though, of the repercussions the community has faced. Okay, let's get into the episode. I want us to go back to the 1970s. During this time, a redevelopment project built the University Village Shopping Center. It had a stationery shop, a bookstore, a supermarket, and clothing shops. Then, in 1999, the University of Southern California bought the land for $25 million. In 2012, the Los Angeles City Council approved USC's $1 billion construction plan. According to the Daily Trojan, USC's student-run newspaper, the construction of the Village would provide 4,000 construction jobs and 8,000 permanent job opportunities, with a 30% local hiring promise. Before the City Council approved this, the university provided space for local residents to voice their thoughts and opinions. Many in the community argued that the Village would be too student-centered and cater towards more affluent students, rather than the low-income surrounding community. I want to take us to my co-host Josias Chavez. He walks down memory lane and recounts an average day here at USC.
As a Mexican-American first-generation college student, I've always quite felt that I didn't 100% belong amongst my peers. At first glance, I look a lot more like the laborers on campus than many of the students. Every day for the last 2.5 years, I wake up, have my morning cup of coffee, kiss my wife goodbye, and make the short bike ride from my complex to the School of Cinematic Arts. I pedal past a cascade of houses mired by peeling paint, foggy windows, and failing rooftops. As I breeze onto campus, I wheel my bike over the cobblestone walkway and affix it to one of the security racks before heading inside. When lunchtime rolls around, my classmates and I walk across the street to the Village. We move in a pack through a sea of students, mostly white, and pile into one of the many restaurants that make up the space. After lunch, we do our second round of classes, and I make my way back home, the grandiose of the architecture lessening as I draw near. The dichotomy between the spaces I inhabit isn't lost on me. On the one hand, I can recognize the privileges that have been afforded to me as a USC student. I've used the Village both as a community and an educational space. On the other hand, I live amongst those who view its construction as an attempt to colonize the area, displacing people of color to make room for more affluent students. Ironically enough, as we begin exploring what this space means to USC and the surrounding community, mostly what has been presented by the media has been a utopian view of what the Village means to the history of this neighborhood. In an attempt to understand this issue and all of its complexity, we took a trip to the archives to see how people feel and felt about the Village 4 years after its construction.
Hundreds of community members gathered at City Hall in support of the university's redevelopment project, the Village at USC.
What the new Village will include is it'll include roughly 4,200 new student beds, around 350,000 square feet of new retail, shopping, and dining options that'll serve both the university and community.
The project will also benefit the neighborhood's economy by creating over 12,000 new jobs, many of which will be filled by local residents.
We need those 12,000 jobs, and it's going to help our community. It's going to enhance it.
It'll provide not just temporary construction jobs and some 8,000 permanent jobs, but they will have benefits associated with it that will create opportunities for small businesses to flourish.
For years, food trucks have lined up on the corner of Hoover and Jefferson to serve students passing by on their way to class. But the new USC Village could take away some of their customers.
Yes, there has been a big difference since the Village opened here at USC. It's slow, but there are also other employees who work there that eat here. There are less sales because of the businesses. Before, when they were not open, there were more sales.
I often go to the village for lunch or coffee during my breaks between classes. I also sometimes go to the village to get together with my friends and have a good time outdoors. I think they are for anyone. I don't feel that the village is exclusive to a certain class of people. It's an open place with a broad offering.
Kind of isolating for like people who live in this area who don't have really like a USC affiliation other than like being in this area.
My understanding of the village is, it's mostly eateries, I guess, like for students. They're kind of overpriced, so I don't like going to them that much. I would say, it's for like wealthier students. I feel like that's who USC caters to, and I know there's like a kind of a rough history around like erecting barriers from the community.
I use the village mainly to get food. Sometimes I'll get Starbucks or Dolce, and then other times I use it to study. I would definitely say, considering the clothing stores we have, for example, that it caters towards people who are able to afford those clothes, for example, like Lululemon. I do know that there was some sort of like quota or something for the amount of employees working in the village. They had to be locals. I think initially when the village was created, that was like what it was created for, so that we wouldn't overly like gentrify kind of the community. But I would say it definitely caters more towards the USC student than locals.
And as we see, like, as Angelinos, we want the same thing for our own community. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. That's why we're here to demand that from USC to take accountability for the things that they have done.
Welcome back to the Neighborhood Watch. So far, we've heard from students, my co-host Josias, and local residents. But now, let's hear from Ben Toney and Enzo Luna. Benjamin is a PhD candidate at USC's School of Public Policy and is a graduate research assistant for social innovation, economic development, and equity research. Enzo is a staff writer for the Daily Trojan and is both a community member and a USC journalism student, advocating for inclusivity and community engagement. Welcome, Ben, and welcome, Enzo.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so how do you think the construction of the village has affected its community members and the students here?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a complicated issue, right? I think that, one of the things from my understanding that the university was trying to accomplish was increasing the amount of student housing that the university itself actually owned, right? And I think that that's one of the main things that they really sort of knocked out of the park. I mean, there are so many more units that are available when you walk through. You can see 4 or 5 stories and so on. But at the same time, there's really just been tremendous transformation of that space from what had been there, both in terms of the actual built form of the structures and in terms of the use patterns of who gets to use it and in what way it gets used, whether it was from small businesses, whether it was from sort of patrons from the community of businesses, whether it was just from people's ability to use the public space in sort of the forum, in benches and the sort of public arena. That's definitely been a thing that I think has sort of changed and transformed.
And for you, Enzo, I know that you are a community member, so you've lived here. Can you talk about kind of how you used this space prior to the USC's construction of the new village that's there right now?
So before the village was rebuilt, it was sort of a place where me and my family would go to buy groceries. There was like a 99-cent store in there where I would buy like school supplies, a movie theater. There was a Wendy's I never ate at, but, it was something that was available there for us to go to, and we felt comfortable going there. We'd, go to the grocery store. There's a Baskin-Robbins right next to it, and I'd had to, beg my mom to buy me ice cream. But, it was a place where I felt welcome and where my family could go, hang out, get what we needed for the home, and feel as though it was a place that we could come back to.
Sure. In your article in the Daily Trojan, you do mention that kind of pre the new build of the village, what you said, and now you're saying that your family doesn't necessarily feel as welcomed. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that, kind of the change that occurred?
So basically what has happened with the village is a big part of why we don't feel welcome is the sorts of stores that they put in there. So for example, my family isn't really familiar with Trader Joe's, and the times that we have gone, it's kind of hard to get what we actually need for the house because we're like shopping for our family, and Trader Joe's kind of has foods that are kind of more on the like sort of gimmicky sometimes, and it's not really like sustainable for our family necessarily.
Right.
And
they have a lot of like prepackaged foods for students to take kind of on the go.
And especially with like my own family, with my mom not really understanding like English, it's kind of hard to understand, like especially the way Trader Joe's packages its foods. And another aspect to that is the price. We could get stuff cheaper somewhere else. And also the other types of stores that they put inside the village, such as like the restaurants that are kind of catered to a specific audience, which is higher income residents, and not necessarily like lower income residents like my family and I. It's hard to sort of identify with these restaurants and know what it's good, like to eat there, because we're not really familiar with the foods.
And Ben kind of mentioned the prospect of USC housing growing. Are you feeling that there are more USC students kind of in the community at large now because of that?
I mean, I definitely don't really see students around the area, but I do see structures being built in my neighborhood. So for example, a building that's like right next to my house used to be, just a regular apartment building. I'd see people like me there, people from the community. And now it's like student housing. And I rarely see students, which is, another issue has to do with the way the area is perceived. But I do see like, more and more of the area being transformed into student housing, and more of like my people being pushed out.
So now that we've kind of talked a little bit more about the housing for students, but also how this has affected its community members, when it comes to job opportunities now, how do you feel that USC has held up the promises they've made to the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the, so to sort of back up firstly, I think it's important to contextualize that there's sort of a process by which those promises even came to be made in the first place. And so the work of groups like the Unidad Coalition and a number of other sort of community-based organizations that worked really hard to pressure USC to adopt a community benefits agreement during the process and sort of after the completion of the project. So I think it's important to just give credit to folks for the work that they did. My understanding is that there have been some successes, but that there had been sort of this general pattern of sometimes under-resourcing the actual programs to onboard, to train, and to sort of in a timely and thorough fashion make sure that there is sort of strategic communications and outreach and relationship building with folks in the neighborhood to sort of be able to be aware of the new retail jobs that were opening around the time that it opened in 2017. I think that's been sort of a protracted challenge and struggle among a number of the different groups, CD Tech being one. So yeah, I mean, there definitely, I think, have been jobs. I think also in the construction, as far as I'm aware, I think some of the local hire sort of stipulations were met. I think they were able to hit their 30% sort of local hire threshold during the construction process. But it's challenging because it's like every iteration, every phase, actually including people and actually building those relationships in a reliable and a sustainable fashion.
Sure.
It really requires resources. And the institution hasn't always been super consistent on making sure those resources are available, proportional, known about, and then delivered.
Sure. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that resources are a main factor kind of why there's this huge separation between the USC community and South LA community. And I know for a fact that there's this perception of South LA that I know you were mentioning. If you want to talk a little bit more about that and kind of how you feel that USC has perceived South LA as a community.
So basically, the issue is the way the area is perceived doesn't necessarily have to do with anything, statistic-wise about like either the danger of the neighborhood. It mostly has to do, it feels like, with who the people who live in the area are and what we look like. And so speaking to some of my peers at USC, a lot of them perceive the area as being like dangerous and not really a place where they can hang out. And, coming from my own experience, it's a pretty calm area. There's a lot of schools around the area, just kids hanging out, stores we could go buy like groceries or, like little stores. And so it feels like it's a safe community to be in. And so when I hear students say that it's like dangerous and they haven't necessarily experienced anything that has caused them to believe that, it feels more as though they're perceiving that area in that way because of the people who live there and not necessarily because of any either like statistic they know about or experience that they have gone through.
Do you feel that the university is perpetuating that problem?
The university perpetuates that problem through their programs such as like DPS, getting constant alerts from them, like, some robbery occurred or some minor crime. Definitely puts students who are unaware of the dynamics of city life in Los Angeles. It makes them feel as though something is like constantly going on and that they need to be like hyper aware and that they can't necessarily walk there. And, that's why there's programs like, the free lift and sort of these things where it doesn't encourage students to walk around the neighborhood and it confines them to, vehicles or their own homes, or it, doesn't encourage them going out and meeting people. It's sort of like used as a way to avoid all of that.
Sure. And when you mentioned free lift, you're referring to the program that starts at 7 p.m. and goes pretty much until 2 in the morning, where USC students within a 2-mile radius are able to take free lifts instead of walking around, which I definitely understand the safety aspect for students, but I definitely agree that it makes the community look unsafe. It frames it in that light.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely sensitive and safety very much, I think, to my understanding, really shaped the development process of the University Village. Certainly the shooting and death of 2 grad students in, I think it was 2012, has definitely changed the way that the university communicates with donors and parents and students and the public. And you really do see that in the design of the village. It is a fortress, right? I mean, if you try to go at night, it's so hard to actually enter. I get really frustrated because I guess I'm clumsy and I'll like try to walk in the entrance and it's like, oh no, that gate's locked. You got to walk around and you can't go through the elevator after a certain point in time. And what it for me reflects is a particular strategy and a particular sort of mindset with respect to what safety means and looks like, right? So I think from the perspective of USC, safety means securitization, policing, sort of disciplining space, disciplining who gets to use and who doesn't get to use.
And is that kind of how the village is being used at the moment?
Well, I was going to finish that statement with the idea that there are other types of ways of thinking about safety where, from sort of a preventive type of perspective, if we are, if we're curious about being able to intervene in things like petty theft, trying to actually shape the social and the economic conditions that put people in positions where they feel like they need to do that or where they feel like that's a good option, that's sort of a different approach to public safety. And in fact, it's not unreasonable to characterize a relationship between, housing displacement, economic hardship, whether people are experiencing unemployment or underemployment, those are characteristics that some of our development activity actually can contribute to for some populations. And so in a weird way, we do contribute to some of these cycles as an institution at the same time that we're trying to sort of interrupt and control them. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, the ability to think about people having the programs and the services and the basic needs met, for me, that could be an alternate approach to safety. But again, we kind of come back down to that bottom line question of resources and how they're distributed and how frequently and at what intensity.
Sure. And Ben, I don't know if you can speak to this, but how would you suggest that USC can evolve and incorporate some of these resources that you were alluding to?
Yeah, I mean, a contract helps, right? When you have something that's written on paper and sort of legally enforceable. I think that's, I say it and laugh because I say it like it's an easy thing to do. But yeah, I mean, I really think, one of the ways of thinking about the development activity is through sort of an ongoing sort of reflective process, where we don't just let things be in the past, but where we try to stay accountable and sort of stay on top of sort of evaluating and actually measuring, well, of these commitments that we made, one, should there have been a larger universe of commitments in the first place? And then of the commitments that have been made, how have we actually performed on these different commitments? I think, again, I would definitely want to return to the kind of political reality of the institution might not prioritize some of these objectives on its own without being sort of pressured. And so the work that folks do to raise awareness, to build a different understanding of the space as a product and as this spatial process and this sort of spatial redesign. I think that, continuing to build awareness and continuing to build sort of a strategy to put pressure on the university could definitely be helpful.
Sure, I definitely agree. I think it's important for students and community members to put pressure on USC to continue to keep those promises rather than, let them fade in a year or two and just be like, oh, we did this, work on it and continue to uphold that. But now that we've kind of discussed the impacts of Village, do you believe that the pros of the Village for students outweigh the cons that have surfaced for the community?
I definitely think it matters which perspective you're looking at it from, because obviously as a student, it definitely outweighs the cons, because, the very fact that it was built is based upon the fact that they knew that this would not benefit the community, but that it would benefit students. And so, from the perspective of a community member, we would say, no, definitely not. The pros do not outweigh the cons, because, gentrification is a continued issue in our community, and it keeps spreading in ways that are, not just the university doing it, but, other secondary companies that work with the university, such as TripleLink. Sure. And so I would say, it definitely does not outweigh the pros, and it's definitely a perspective, to say that the pros outweigh the cons would be a perspective from somebody who comes from a higher income background, is disconnected from the community, and, doesn't really care much for the community.
So but a large majority of USC's undergrad population does come from backgrounds such as those that are more affluent, and they are coming into the community. And because of how USC has framed the building of the Village in this, look how beautiful, look how amazing this is for all of our students, that's how students who are applying to USC and are coming from other areas are reacting. How would you suggest that USC incorporates the community within USC and within the Village? Is there a way besides contracts and jobs for USC to create a feeling of belonging and community outside of its literal gated boundaries?
it's definitely difficult because, I mean, one big aspect of it that made it welcoming for the community was the fact that the sorts of stores that you were seeing there were like affordable, they were small businesses. And so I can't see a change like that happening because, you know, the Target seems like it's there to stay, the Trader Joe's as well. But just, you know, perhaps like events. I remember when I was in elementary school, I went to the village before it was reconstructed for this art event that USC did in partnership with my elementary school, where we were able to present our art. We had like food in the dining hall. And so more things like that I feel would, you know, bring the elementary school kids in and have events like that would benefit the community, and they would start seeing it as a place where they're also welcome.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so much to say. Can I go back to your earlier question?
Of course.
So, yeah, on the question of like whether the pros outweigh the cons, Enzo, I really agree with your whole point about like, well, that's probably going to depend on the position of the person who's speaking at the moment. But I also, you know, there are other ways of kind of thinking about it, and sort of looking at the issue as well. The whole idea about students benefiting is really interesting at a time when like colleges as institutions rely so heavily on rental income. Like, I don't know at the moment what undergrad tuition is. I think it's in the ballpark of 60 grand a year, and then room and board is probably 15, 16 on top of that. And a lot of students are taking debt to pay for this, right? So when we say that it's benefiting students over a student's life cycle, you know, if comparably they're drawing down more debt to pay for more expensive housing on campus than they might be off campus. I haven't measured that, so I don't actually know. But I think there's just when we say that it's benefiting students, it's also really benefiting the institution. It's a really important part of their revenue strategy, right? The ability to be landlords, and the ability to sort of develop and control the real estate around the area. And that's one of the things too that I think we should be thoughtful about, both the ways that these are decisions that are made by you know, the board, decisions that are made by the institution, but also that are common among lots of higher education institutions, right? And that there are some of these larger structural patterns about how major institutions that have lots of resources, about how they interact with their neighbors.
Sure, yeah. I remember when we were on the phone a few days ago, we were talking about how UCLA is doing a similar thing, but because it's Westwood, it's not causing as much of a crazy reaction.
Well, yeah, right. And so the 100%, the development history there is different, where from my understanding, when UCLA first emerges in the 20s, there's this sort of gift of land by a couple of folks who had sort of large holdings in land. And it was kind of a package deal where they were building Bel Air and Westwood along with UCLA. And those ended up being very sort of high price, high barrier to entry neighborhoods. And they've basically been exclusive for, as far as I'm aware, pretty much the whole time. It's not easy to, you know, to find affordable housing in Westwood and in Bel Air and in that area. And so one of the things that's different about USC has been the sort of trajectory of development of the neighborhood, where, you know, a place like UCLA, it's already exclusive, so they don't have to redo the exclusion. USC, on the other hand, is in this process over the last decades, right? Because the other thing I think we should keep in mind when we think about the University Village is just all of the different real estate development activity that USC has either been directly or indirectly involved in, you know, in the surrounding areas. And unfortunately, you know, it does have a history of doing this kind of extractive, exclusionary, sort of displacing and gentrifying type of development activity. And so how do I wrap that into something that is more optimistic and more hopeful. Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess there's a part of me that wants to be cautious about like understanding that this is a part of the orientation that the university has, and to just kind of return to the importance of like what it is that you're doing and what it is that you're doing, and what it is that lots of people are doing to sort of raise these alternate understandings, and these important histories of things that actually happened that go undermeasured, that go undercharacterized, and that often kind of get forgotten and swept either under the rug or sort of lost in the dust.
Sure. Yeah, well, thank you both, Ben and Enzo, for joining me today on the Neighborhood Watch. Josias and I both appreciate all the information and insight you've shared with us today. I definitely think as USC students, we have to remember that we are a part of LA First. And we need to hold the institution accountable for what they're doing, and I definitely agree. I think the small little things that we can all do as humans just to improve ourselves and improve the community are great first steps to take. So, like I said, thank you so much. And to my listeners, thank you. Have a great day.